Okay, just as I did last time, I'm going to go over even all of the more administrative finer points of this, just to make sure that they are recorded, so when people want to go through these walkthroughs, they will know how to do all of the tasks, all inclusive, because if you do not pay attention to these smaller details and you get them right, this is not going to work, and then you'll end up being frustrated because you'll keep doing this over and over again, and then you will not understand why this attack, why this connection is taking place. So first of all, we will start by turning off our real-time protection on the Windows 10 virtual machine. Of course, then you do that by opening up the security application, and you click on the shield icon and then find real-time protection. But we are going to keep this open so we can refer to it later, just in case Windows decides to turn it back on. For the last walkthrough we did, we had a folder that we created called Tools, and I put it in the exclusions list, in the security app. We will not be doing that for this walkthrough because we are using a dynamic link library, not an executable. Executables are self-contained units, files, in which you can run it, and it has everything it needs inside to actually run. A dynamic link library consists of blocks of code that run to assist either a single running process, or it can be shared between multiple running processes. So it requires an additional application to have it run. And I gave the example prior of what the Russians did in the earlier 2000s when they used a corrupted DLL in the SolarWinds application that many government agencies use. They managed to corrupt one, which went into a patch that was sent to all of the customers, and those get cloned and sent out to all the workstations. DLLs are, in my opinion, better choices to use when you're trying to get onto a machine, if you have to send a payload over, because they are not scrutinized as heavily as executable files are. It is also, in some ways, easier to blend them in to the local environment because you can go to a folder like Windows System 32, or you can go to a running application to all its associated files, and it will have dozens, maybe more DLL files associated with it. So if you happen to make one and you obfuscated it enough to where just by dropping it on the disk it would not get picked up by antivirus, if you just gave it some routine mundane name, it is likely that it will slip past security. That's why these are usually more popular methods of delivery, and there are a number of different types of attacks that involve the use of dynamic link libraries. So first, before we turn this part off, the second piece is we also need to make sure and check our IP address, because we want to make sure that both machines that we are on are in the same subnet. So the 245 subnet. And the last thing we need to make sure is I want to open up the directory where we are going to be transferring our payload when it is sent over. In C Windows System 32 is where a lot of Windows administrative files and folders live, as you can see. You can see just the total number of DLLs that are here. We are going to be using one called rundll32.exe. There are other similar files or executables or applications that are native to Windows that can be used to execute a DLL file. This is called living off the land, where you are actually using applications that are native to Windows to actually do some of your work. This lowers your profile, and it prevents having to come up with additional obfuscation to get your tools past antivirus. So when we transfer our DLL over, it's going to go into this folder. For this demonstration, I am going to have to transfer it directly to the desktop, because you will get an error if you try to transfer a file directly into System32. It is a protected folder. So we have now checked our subnet. We now have our final destination folder for our DLL file. So now when we're done, it will be transferred over, and then we can set up our listener and our meterpreter connection. So we will now we will first check our IP address over here to make sure that the subnet is the same, and here we have to use ifconfig. ipconfig is what we use on Windows. As you see, we are on 192.245 subnet, so this is good. We are both our clients are in the same subnet. This is why it's good to make sure that you have a good information gathering phase, because you want to make sure all of your technical details and parameters are accounted for. Otherwise, your mission will fail because something is not going to work right. So the next thing we are going to check is we are going to open up our Apache 2 web service. That folder lives in var www html, and we have to open this up as root administrator. And then we authenticate, and now we have our Apache 2 folder open. So we're going to move this to the side right now, because when we have created our DLL, we will move it into this folder. For right now, we'll set it aside. And lastly, we are going to make sure that Apache 2 Web Services is turned on. So now that that is on, all the administrative details now have been taken care of. We are going to create our payload file, and then we are going to start our listener, and we should have everything in place to do our delivery. So I'll open up another terminal. In this case, msfvenom. And just one note, when you are doing this locally, or you are doing your pen testing, if you make a mistake or you have to create several payloads, it's probably more efficient and better if you actually, on the subsequent payload you create, use a different port number, even use a different name. Because if you end up using the same name and port numbers, sometimes the port you used previously is going to end up being busy, which means your payload will fail when you try and run it a second time. Also, when you use the same name, you may have the file with that same name stored in memory on the victim computer, which means that will cause another possible complication. So just to keep things clean and organized, it is better to change the port number and name. And then also make sure that you have the other parameters correct. So in this case, I've already used this, so I'm just going to say, I'll give it an or just an ordinary name like calendar.dll. And we will create. Okay, so once again, just to quickly explain, the -p parameter is to specify our payload type. The one we have been using and will continue to use is a 64-bit Windows reverse TCP meterpreter, and this is a staged payload. And we know it is staged because it has all of these forward slashes separating the components in this payload. The L host is going to be our Kali Linux machine because this is a reverse connection, so we want it to come back to us. And the port number, again, it should be different than the last one, and it should, just by habit, be something a little bit higher than the first 1,000 ports, because by default, some of these scanning tools will scan several of the lower ports because they don't want to spend a lot of time scanning all 65,000 plus ports. So pick something higher than 1,000, lower than 65,000, and if you're doing this for real, try to avoid repeating numbers or patterns like 1, 2, 3, 4, 3, 4, 5, 6. But since we're doing this just for demonstration purposes, we want to remember what it is, so I'll just leave it this way. And we specify that this particular one is a DLL and not an EXE like the previous one we did. So it is created, and now we are going to move it over into our Apache 2 folder. And before we move over to the victim machine, I'm going to keep this open so I can use these to actually help me create the multi-handler. So to start the multi-handler, I will open a new terminal, type in MSF console, and we wait for the MSF6 prompt. Say use exploit multi handler, and then we give it 3 pieces of information. Again, all of these have to match, that are in the listener, they have to match what is in the payload that we send over, which is why we keep this open so we can refer to it. So I will copy the payload information. Oh no. And then we will give it the L host, which will be our Kali Linux address. And then we will give it the L port, which is 7777. And then we will say exploit. So, yeah, when I did this earlier today, apparently I used a port number that I'd used in the past, and the meterpreter session was actually still active on it. So as soon as I did this, I actually got a new meterpreter session. So I had to create a new payload with a new port number. That's why I go ahead and create, when I create new payloads, I use different information, so that won't happen. So we know that it's in its passive listening state because it says started TCP handler. So now that all this is ready, we can now move back over to our Windows machine. And now I am going to transfer the calendar.dll file over here, and I'm going to do it first to the desktop and then move it over. So if you want to clear your screen, just type CLS, and we'll again make sure that everything is turned off, and then we'll say curl oops copy So again, when you're using the curl command, you will use the initial command followed by a fully formed URL. In this case, our URL is our Kali Linux machine, followed by a / and then the name of our hosted file, which is calendar.dll. And then we have the output, because this is in case you want to name it something other than what it was initially named on the hosted computer. So we'll keep it the same name. So when, and, oh, actually I missed something. We have to move up one. Since this is actually in the user's student directory, we want to go into the desktop folder. So that is one directory away. So it'll show up there. So we have to do a CD desktop. So now, let's see if I can get there. Oh, I gotta type it all in again. So, HTTP. As you can see, we have now transferred our DLL file, and it is directly on the desktop. So I will move it into the System32 folder where our other application is located. Okay, did it move? Okay, so now we have everything where it needs to be. And now I just need to move, since we are going to be executing something inside of the System32 folder, the DOS window has to be in the same folder. So I will change directory. I have to go up. System32. So now we're in the System32 folder, and now I'm going to execute the run DLL command. Now just to briefly explain again, run DLL32.exe is a native application that lives in Windows in folder Windows System32. That is the first item you put in this. Second is calendar, or the name of your DLL payload, followed by a comma, because when you are running this particular command will require those two parameters. It will require the name of your payload, a comma, and then if this was actually going to be a real DLL, you would put the API or the function that you are wishing to access in this spot. But since we are not running this in a legitimate fashion, we will not be doing that, but we have to put a value here, otherwise this command will fail. So this that you see, the XYZ, is a junk parameter, meaning it is just filling a hole or satisfying a position so the command will successfully execute. So we execute it and we do not get any errors. So when we go back, we have a meterpreter session. So once we are here, last time I think I did a few items, but today I'm going to just demonstrate a few other things that you can do once you're at the meterpreter shell. One thing that you can do that you may have to do when you are doing post-exploitation is you may have to be back down at the Windows level. You have your reverse connection, but maybe you have to execute some Windows commands and you won't really be able to do that straight from a meterpreter shell. but you can do it from a DOS prompt or a PowerShell prompt. So if you need to get back down to a DOS prompt, you can just simply type shell, and then we'll bring you back to the DOS prompt. You need to do this. Maybe you want to do something like check the other computers that are on your network, so you can run ping commands, or you can do an ARP command, or execute a few other like batch files that have been set up. You can do that from a DOS prompt, or you can make use of some of the commandlets that are in PowerShell. So for that, you would need to be in a PowerShell session. So to do that from a DOS prompt, PowerShell.exe. So now we have a PowerShell session. When I do the final offensive walkthrough on Monday, we are going to be using PowerShell to disable firewall and disable antivirus, and probably whitelist some files. So along with this, if you need to get out of it and just get back to your meterpreter session, just type, in this case, exit twice, and you're back to meterpreter session. So along with that, if you need to navigate somewhere else, because when you first spawn your meterpreter session, it will spawn inside the Windows System 32 folder. What if you need to get out and move out somewhere elsewhere if you're going to be downloading or exfiltrating some files? You would need to, one, see where you are, like what's in your current folder. So you do a dir, and we have those. Maybe you want to go up one directory, cd space ... cd space ... dir. So you can keep moving around until you've actually gotten to the right place that you need to go, and then you can do things like download or upload something from the Kali machine onto your target machine, just depending on what your mission is. Because remember, when you're in your teams and you're doing your offensive mission, I'm going to be giving each team one of 4 different missions. So you may be tasked to do something like just some web defacement, or maybe you're going to be doing some disinformation. So you might have to upload some things to your target machine, or maybe you're just there to steal stuff. So you'll need to change your location to the appropriate folder once you have an idea of what the directory structure is like, and then you start downloading your files and folders that you need to. And maybe you can't download an entire folder, so you might even have to use PowerShell to do things like zip up a bunch of files into one folder or one zip file in order to more efficiently download something. That would be a use case for you to drop out of your meterpreter session into a PowerShell session. So there's only a few other things that I'm going to go over as far as post-exploitation in the next walkthrough video. So that's all I'm going to do for this particular walkthrough. So